Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that, do that, do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. Today we're going to be discussing a case that took almost 30 years to crack. This is a case where if it wasn't for the help of 3 women, it likely would have never been solved. This is the murder of Mandy Stavik. Amanda Stavik, who went by Mandy, was born in Anchorage, Alaska on the 16th of April 1971. Her parents were Mary and Glenn Stavik. She had 2 older siblings named Brent and Molly, and then her little brother Lee. Not much is really known about her early life. We know that Mary and Glenn did eventually divorce. Mary left Alaska, taking Molly, Mandy and Lee with her. She moved to Acme, Whatcom County in Washington State, where she alone raised the children. Acme was exactly the type of place where you'd want to live and raise your young family. It was small and tight-knit, considered very safe. There was next to no crime. People would leave their doors unlocked, their keys in their car, and everyone knew one another. The views here too are just absolutely incredible. It's a very rural area with vast green fields and forests, mountain views, and a long winding river going through it. Mary led by example with her little ones. She was a very strong woman. It was later reported that when she was in her 70s, she could still be seen outside, axe in hand, chopping her own wood. Mandy would take on a lot of her mother's qualities. She too was very headstrong and knew what she wanted. She was described as fearless, vivacious, bright, strong and independent. She was larger than life and the quote, all-American girl. Something everyone said about Mandy was just how athletic she was. She wanted to do all of the sports. Cheerleading, softball, baseball, horse riding, running. She was all over all of them. She wanted to be the best at everything that she done, and by having this mentality, she managed to land herself a spot on the basketball team, where she was lucky number 13. At school, she was a great student, very well liked by her teachers, who all said that she was a really good kid. Mandy was an aspiring pilot who just wanted to get out there. She wanted to do and experience everything that she could. She had big dreams, ambitions, aspirations, and many plans for her future. Mandy graduated from Mount Baker High School and went on to enroll at Central Washington University. In 1989, at 18 years old, Mandy was a freshman at the university. She, along with another friend and her boyfriend Rick Zender, travelled from the university back to Acme for the Thanksgiving break. Rick actually drove the girls in his car. The Staviks lived in a house on top of a 25-acre plot of land on Strand Road, and they were tucked away right at the end of the road. There weren't many neighbours on this street. There was only about 10 to 12 houses, and there was a good amount of distance, space between each of the houses, which were all sort of set off of the road. Mandy arrived back home in time for Thanksgiving, and all through that day, she soaked in the precious time with her family. They ate until they almost burst, they laughed together, and thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. The day after Thanksgiving, so it's now the 24th of November, Mandy was planning on meeting up with some of her friends who she hadn't seen in a while because she had been at university. Before heading out to meet them though, Mandy decided that she wanted to go for a run. Usually, Mary, who was in her 50s, would go out with Mandy, riding her bike alongside her. But Mary's sister had actually travelled all the way from North Carolina and she was still at the house visiting them, so on this day, Mary decided to stay behind. That was no problem for Mandy though. She stuck a leash on her German Shepherd Kyra and headed out between 2 and 3 p.m. She ran her usual route, going all the way down Strand Road until she arrived at the nearby Nooksack River, turning around and then heading back home. This was around about a 5-mile run, one that she did pretty much daily whenever she was at home. Mandy set out wearing a light coloured sweatshirt, teal green joggers and white running shoes. Clutched in her hand was her Walkman, which she was listening to music through. Now, while I was doing this case, I just had to go and look for myself. I don't know why the question just came into my head, but the #1 song in America at this time in November 1989 was Blame It on the Rain by Milli Vanilli. Sometime later, Mandy's brother Lee, who had been down the street at a friend's house, arrived back home and was both surprised and slightly confused to find that Mandy wasn't there. He was at the Andersons' house, which was basically a halfway point on Mandy's route running back home. He was there, glancing out of the window, when he saw his big sister jogging past, flashing him a smile, giving him a wave, and going off in the direction of their home. He stayed at the Andersons a little bit longer. I couldn't exactly figure out how long, but long enough where it was alarming for him to hear that neither Mandy or Kyra had came back yet. They should have gotten back home long before him. He expressed this to Mary, telling her that he had seen Mandy run past. Mary began to ring around the neighbours to see if they were with Mandy. Maybe she got stuck talking to someone, telling them about how university was going, or maybe she got pulled into someone's house for a drink and they were just sat yapping away, not realising how long they were taken. But each person that Mary spoke to said no, Mandy wasn't there and they didn't know where she was. Sometime after, Kyra would run back to the house, but she was alone. Mandy wasn't with her. Kyra was described as being very upset, distressed, and that she just didn't know what to do with herself. Mary asked Kyra, "Where is Mandy? Take me to Mandy. What has happened to Mandy?" But Kyra was too upset to signal or do anything. This was frankly terrifying for Mary. Kyra was very protective over Mandy, so what could have happened to make her react like this? What could have possibly happened that resulted in the dog returning home without Mandy? Mary knew immediately from that moment that something was wrong. Mandy wouldn't have just went off without telling anyone where she was going or who she was going out with. Again, she had plans with her friends that night and she wasn't going to be going out in a sweaty running gear. She should be at home getting freshened up and getting changed. Why wasn't she? This was completely out of character for Mandy. Mary and a few others went outside to briefly look around for her, but when they couldn't find her, they contacted the police to report her missing at 5:30 p.m. Mary rang Molly, who again is the older sister, and told her that Mandy was missing. The first thing that Molly said was, quote, "Not again. This can't be happening to our family again." Mandy's disappearance wasn't the first devastating, life-altering thing to happen to the Stavik family. 14 years prior, Mary's oldest son Brent was murdered, shot to death, and his killer was still out there.
This episode is brought to you by Greenlight. You can't solve every case for your kids, but with Greenlight, they'll have the instincts and money skills to stay out of trouble. With a Greenlight debit card and money app, parents can monitor spending and teach financial responsibility. Educate your kids as they grow, from earning allowance and tracking chores to learning how to save and invest. Start your risk-free Greenlight trial today at greenlight.com/Spotify.
My oldest son's name was Brent. We lived very close to Fort Richardson in Anchorage, and he had permission from them to hunt on base. And one day, somebody shot him. They called me and said they had his body. He had 17 .22 shells in his back. There was a lot of investigating.
It was basically an unsolved murder.
I still don't know who it was.
Mary was still dealing with the trauma of losing her son to a senseless, unprovoked murder when her daughter disappeared, and I just can't imagine all of the emotions and fear that would have been slamming into her like a brick wall. Thankfully, which we don't always hear, police jumped into action immediately. They brought in a man tracker who was, as his name suggested, trying to track Mandy down. He followed some footprints that her trainers had left in the ground alongside Kyra's paw prints. Just over 200 yards away from her home, about the length of 2 football fields just under, there was a wooded area that Mandy would have had to run past. This is where her footprints stopped. The ground didn't suggest that there was any sort of struggle or altercation. The ground wasn't really disturbed or how this man tracker would have expected to have found it if a struggle had taken place, so there was no scuff marks or dragon marks, that type of thing. They could see that Mandy hadn't been chased by someone, and in all honesty, if someone did try to chase after her, Mandy was fit as a fiddle and probably would have been able to outrun them. So this indicated to the officers that Mandy was abducted, likely by someone in a car who took her away by threatening her with a weapon. She was probably taken at gunpoint. It's thought that Kyra was kicked into a ditch by this person, hence how she wasn't able to stop the abduction, and that kind of correlated with her behaviour when she arrived back home. She may have watched her beloved owner in a distressed state being taken, and the force of the kick probably really hurt and scared, distressed and disoriented her too. Mary rang everyone that she could for help, and soon many of her neighbours were out of their homes searching for Mandy. Police and sheriffs were out horseback searching, they had boats on the river, there was helicopters in the sky, bloodhounds were brought in, and they searched in and around all of the vast fields nearby Mandy's home. The community rallied to try and find her. Every single newspaper, news station, radio station were reporting on her disappearance. How could something like this happen? A young girl, home from university for Thanksgiving, abducted basically from her doorstep in such a small, tight-knit community. It was unthinkable to consider that one of their own could have done this. On, I believe, day 2 of the search, someone found something. On a kind of overgrown wet road where there was lots of brush and debris, there was some green joggers. They were found on top of a pile of leaves. They were dirty and ripped and matched the description of what Mandy had been wearing. Mary was brought down to the scene and was asked to look at the joggers. Obviously, she couldn't touch them, but she could have a look at them. Were they what Mandy was wearing? Could they be hers? Mary couldn't say for certain. Her mind was probably really foggy and going a mile a minute, but she actually said that she didn't think so. The joggers were extracted anyway and sent to the lab for forensic analysis. They were able to recover tiny trace fibres of something along with semen stains. However, I don't think that these were connected to Mandy's disappearance. After these joggers being mentioned here, the discovery of them, they're never really mentioned again. By now, Mandy Stavik had the internal realisation that Mandy was gone. She knew that her daughter was dead. She didn't know why or how she knew it. Maybe it was her mother's instinct, but she knew her youngest daughter was gone. On the 27th of November 1989, 3 days after Mandy's disappearance, detectives who were searching in the Nooksack River would make a devastating recovery. In the South Fork bend of the river, around about 6 miles away from her home, they would discover the body of 18-year-old Mandy Stavik. She was found completely naked apart from her socks and her running shoes. She was laid face down in the water and was sort of stuck on a branch which had actually prevented her from floating away with the current. Detective Ron Pearson was one of the men who recovered her body, and he said that he looked down to this young girl who so resembled his own daughter, and this is what he told her.
I said, I got you.
Even though this sounds a very morbid thing to say, because of the cold temperatures of the water, Mandy's body was described as well preserved. During her autopsy, it was discovered that Mandy had been raped by her abductor, his DNA still present inside of her, and thankfully so, because she was in the water and there was a worry, there was a concern that any, if not all of the evidence might have already washed away by the time they found her. Being able to recover this DNA evidence was a bit of a relief. There were no signs of strangulation nor binding, however, she did have several scratching injuries that were found on her thighs, leg and her bum. It's believed that after the rape had taken place, Mandy had tried to run away. She raced through an area which had blackberry bushes, and the branches on them have really big sharp thorns protruding from them. So it was theorized that as she was running away, she was racing through these blackberry bushes, being scratched by the thorns as she was doing so. The abductor caught up to her though, and he inflicted a blunt force injury to her head, causing a hepatoma, which is bleeding under the scalp. He had either struck her in the head or bashed her head against one of the nearby trees. After Mandy fell unconscious after she was knocked out by her abductor, she was put into the river face down where she drowned. Her cause of death was ruled as asphyxia by drowning, and detectives knew that she must have been incapacitated when she was put in there because Mandy was a strong swimmer. She was actually a qualified lifeguard, and if she was conscious, awake, aware of her surroundings when she was put in the river, she would have easily been able to get herself out. Where she was found, the depth of the river was actually only knee-high, so all Mandy would have had to have done was literally stand up. That further solidified that she was unconscious when she was put into the river. Based on the contents of her stomach, it was estimated that Mandy had died between 3 to 4 hours after her last meal, so this meant that she had died between 3:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. By 4:30 p.m, Lee had already expressed his concern to Mary, and the family were already trying to find her. If she was found, she likely would have survived. A memorial service was held for Mandy, and so many people were set to attend that none of the nearby churches would have been able to hold them all, so it was held within a school. Just over 1,000 people went. Mandy's friends sang songs dedicated to her, and people laid beautiful bright flowers. News of her death equally devastated and terrified the community. Mandy had so much promise, a true love for life, and that had been ripped away from her. But by who? People in the community were scared. Women were scared to go out alone, and everyone started to side-eye the people around them. Was the person who was standing next to them at the shop or in front of them at the bank Mandy's killer? Was the killer even still in Acme? Detectives began conducting door-to-door inquiries, and through this they became interested in a couple of men. Paul Malik lived on Strand Road, and during the door-to-door inquiries he told the officers that he actually saw Mandy on her route running back home. He was reversing off of his drive and she ran right past him. She kept on running until she went round a bend and then he couldn't see her anymore. He told the detectives that he had seen a black truck on the street that day, but he was very evasive with other details about it. So he didn't know the make or the model, anything from the registration, and it seemed like he was being purposefully vague. Was he being careful with what he was saying so that he wouldn't trip up on potential lies, or was he making it up as he went? Through the investigation, Paul did things to insert himself into the case, which is something that perpetrators have been known to do. They want to keep an eye on the investigation, what's happening, to try and sense if the police are close to discovering them. During a formal interview, Paul refused to provide a DNA sample to compare to what had been recovered from Mandy. For the investigators, they thought, well, if he didn't do it, what's he hiding? What is his problem? Following his refusal, the detectives managed to obtain a court order which forced Paul to provide a DNA sample, which, side note, I think it's absolutely wild that you can be forced to do that the courts can say, you have to give over your DNA or you're going to prison, but by the way, when we check you into prison, we're going to be taking your DNA. Anyway, after Paul provided the sample, it was sent off for analysis. This small police department weren't the ones that were handling the DNA evidence because in 1989 it was still in its infancy, so everything that they were getting was being sent off to the FBI. Paul's results eventually came back and it determined that he was not a match, and so he was ruled out from the investigation. Rick Zender, who was Mandy's on and off boyfriend of 3-ish years, was of course spoken to and investigated. He was very cooperative with the police. He provided statements, he willingly gave a DNA sample, fingerprints, and did everything that the detectives asked of him. He too was ruled out. David Succi, described as a local drifter, was seen around the area of where they believed that Mandy was abducted. David would be ruled out by DNA analysis too. It was mainly ruling people out with the DNA evidence that the police were doing at that point. 30 or so local men provided the police with DNA samples to clear themselves, and each one of them would be crossed off of the suspect list. For a short period of time, the idea that Mandy could have been a victim to one of America's most infamous serial killers came up. The Green River Killer, who went on to murder at least 49 women, was active during this time. He committed his killings in Washington state and his killers were connected to rivers, hence his name, and Mandy was close to his victim profile of white blonde women. Mandy's file was taken to the Green River Task Force for them to examine to determine if it was possible that she could have been one of his victims, which the Green River Task Force deemed that she probably wasn't. Her case didn't fit. So there was another avenue of investigation that led the detectives nowhere. The detectives worked tirelessly on this case and they thoroughly looked into each and every tip that they were given, and at one point they had to comb through hundreds. They were drowning in tips. People that were reporting many of these tips were probably hoping to get a share of the $25,000 reward that was being offered in exchange for information leading to an arrest. Despite all of their hard work and best efforts, detectives weren't able to pin a suspect. There was no more leads for them to follow. They didn't know where else to look. There was no new evidence, and so the murder of Mandy Stavik went cold. In 2009, a detective who grew up in Acme, who went to Mandy's high school and basically grew up new in the case, went on to become the lead investigator. The cold case had changed hands twice already, but this man was determined that he was going to be the one to crack it. He meticulously read through all of the case files, all of them being like 3 inches thick, a total of up to 4,000 pages of information. He read through all of the interviews and the statements, all of the evidence, soaking in everything that he could. He hoped that with a fresh set of eyes, something would jump out to him, something would stick out to him that no one had noticed or no one else had seen before. He became interested in a man named John Wisniewski. At the time of Mandy's murder, he was a local drug dealer in that area, and he had apparently been bragging to people that he knew who did it. He knew who kidnapped, raped, and murdered Mandy Stavik. The detective wanted to speak to John to find out what he really knew, and he wasn't going to let the fact that John now lived in Cambodia to stop him. The detective travelled all of that way, only for John to say that he didn't really know anything. The detective knew, just as the ones before him did, that the DNA evidence was going to be the thing to solve this case. Inspired by something that the police force were doing here in the UK actually, this new detective ordered a DNA sweep. He began tracking down men who were living in and around the Acme area, who were around the right age demographic and things like that, and he would go and knock on their doors asking for a DNA sample. The detective would collect as much as he could to then send off for comparison. He went from door to door to door, and while he was here getting the samples, which I think most men gave over willingly, he took the opportunity to ask them a couple of questions again. Did they know anything? Did they remember anything? Did they have any hunches? By now, Mandy's murder was 2 decades old, and during that time, a lot of things can happen, a lot of things can change. People's loyalties change, people become more willing to speak. But once again, despite the DNA sweep and talking to people again, nothing got them any closer to identifying the killer. It was in the summer of 2013 when Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson were at a water park with their children. The women were sat together on the grass, watching the little ones having fun, splashing and going down the slides while they were sat reminiscing. The 2 women had both went to Mount Baker High School, and somewhere within the conversation, Mandy Stavik's name was brought up. Mandy was slightly older than the girl, so they only really knew of her at the school, but they distinctly remember what had happened to her. They remembered when she was murdered. Heather and Marilee looked at each other, and then Heather blurted out, quote, "I know who killed her," followed by Marilee saying, "I do too." I knew that it was Tim Bass. Timothy Forrest Bass was a 22-year-old man living with his family on Strand Road back in 1989. He attended Mount Baker High School, where he was described as a bit strange. He was a bit of a loner, especially in his teen years, and he didn't have many friends. He really struggled with the social aspect of his life. He did, however, have a brilliant relationship with his younger brother Tom. The brothers were extremely close. They would always be sitting talking and playing sports together. Tom kind of overshadowed or outshined Tim. People only knew Tim because he was popular Tom's older brother. Tim was the epitome of a person who faded into the background. At some point in his teen years, Tim's then girlfriend attempted to break up with him over the phone, and this really shaped his outlook and his attitude towards women. He told this girlfriend that if she went through with the breakup, he would take his own life. And on the other end of the phone, she heard a gunshot. Now, Tim hadn't fired the gun on himself. He sort of shot away into nothing. But from here is where he developed a fury, resentment, hatred towards women, which was apparently very apparent. It wasn't something that he tried to conceal. From his home, which was just under 2 miles away from the Staviks, Tim would be able to watch Mandy as she ran past his house on her daily route. It was a small town, so he knew who she was, but more so because Tom was one of Mandy's friends. He was one of the people that Mandy was supposed to be meeting up with on the night that she was murdered. Shortly after that day, Tim Bass moved. He left Acme, eventually moving to the Emerson area, which was around about 20 miles away. He quickly married his high school girlfriend, Gina Malone. It's unclear if this is the girlfriend who tried breaking up with him over the phone, or if she managed to get away with him and Gina was a different girlfriend. Throughout the marriage, Tim was an awful husband. He was controlling. He told Gina what she was and wasn't allowed to wear, who she was allowed to speak to, and where she was allowed to go. He was emotionally abusive, always speaking to her like shit on the bottom of his shoe. He'd call her a bitch and all of the names under the sun. He treated her like a servant. If he told her to make him a sandwich or to go get him a drink, she would have to stop whatever she was doing and do it straight away because he would get angry. Tim was aggressive. Gina recalled on one occasion when he got so angry that he balled up his hands into fists and put them in her face. Heartbreakingly, Gina tried to leave. She didn't want this life. She didn't want to be treated like this, to be spoke like this, to be living in a nightmare. At one point, she actually went ahead and filed a restraining order against Tim on the grounds of domestic violence. She was in the very early stages of filing for divorce when he made the ultimate threat. Tim told Gina that if she left him, he would take their 3 children and she would never see them again. That wasn't a reality that Gina was ever going to allow, so she stayed. Tim had used their children as weapons to manipulate and trap Gina. Back at the water park, Heather and Marilee almost felt this sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off of their shoulders. They both had very disturbing, bad experiences with Tim Bass, and they shared their stories with one another. When Heather was only 15, she had been to a softball match and afterwards went to Dairy Queen with a couple of her friends. They all piled into a car or into a truck, and she ended up being sat next to Tim Bass, who was in his 20s. He complimented her, saying that she had beautiful eyes, and then began to inappropriately touch her thighs. Marilee then recalled her experience with Tim. One evening in July 1991, she was home alone with her infant child when she heard a knock at the door. It was her husband's friend, Tim. Tim asked Marilee if he could use her phone. He had been out hunting and he wanted to give his wife a ring. Knowing Tim and knowing that he is a good friend of her husband, Marilee allowed him inside. She watched him press the buttons on the phone, typing in a number, but she could hear that it didn't ring on the other end. There was just a beeping sound, like he had tried to call a disconnected phone or an old number. That is when Tim turned to her, telling her that he would drive past her house just to look at her, to watch her, that he was in love with her and he wanted to have sex with her. Shocked, Marilee refused and she told Tim to get out, to leave, but he wouldn't. He kept on trying and trying to get her into the bedroom. Fear pulsed through Marilee's body. Her baby was in the house. Her baby was in the other room, and this man wasn't taking no get out for an answer. She threatened him, saying that if he did not leave right now, she would ring the police, and miraculously, it worked. It scared him. He turned and he left her house. Neither of these women had ever shared their stories or experiences with Tim until this very moment when they were telling each other. They were scared to speak out regarding their suspicion of Tim being Mandy's murderer simply because of the weight of the accusations. Now, however, they weren't afraid anymore. One of the women reached out to one of her old high school friends who now just so happened to be a detective, and she expressed her gut feeling about Tim Bass, sharing what had been said at the water park. Back in 1989, the Bass family were questioned, but they were never asked and so never provided DNA samples for comparison. The Bass men were good men. They came from a good family, and it was one of those where it was like, no, it couldn't be them. False assumptions being made off of their reputation. I can imagine that during the family being interviewed, Tom's connection to Mandy and his genuine concern for her probably did make the police think that this family couldn't have been involved. Now, however, with this new information and no one else to look into, what did they have to lose? Detectives arrived at Tim's home and Gina allowed them inside. He was due back home from his job as a bakery delivery driver any minute. When he finally sat down with the officers, they asked him about Mandy Stavik, if/what he knew about her. Tim looked up to the ceiling, going, Mandy, 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 making a show of apparently thinking about her when he has a revelation, saying, quote, "Ah, yeah, that's the girl that they found in the river." Tim's ignorance was very unbelievable to the detectives. Mandy's case was huge. He lived on our street and she was friends with his brother, so the fact that he pretended to forget her or not know who she was felt like he was trying to distance himself. Suspicious thing number one. The detectives then asked if he would provide them a DNA sample for comparison, just so they'd be able to rule him out, cross the T's and dot the I's, something that they had already done with hundreds of other men. And surprisingly, Tim said no. He explained that he didn't trust the police. He watched enough of them crime shows and saw how many people went to prison after giving their DNA. Suspicious thing number two. Gina later recalled how after the detectives left, she had said to Tim, "Why didn't you just give a sample?" And he said that they would have used it to frame him. This triggered a chilling memory. Sometime beforehand, she and Tim were sat watching a crime show when he called the killer stupid for leaving evidence behind and getting caught. He then turned to his wife and told her that if he committed a murder, he would never be caught. Now more than ever, the detectives were determined to get that sample. He was suspect number one. They went to the bakery where he was working and spoke to his manager, Kim Wagner. They told her, in so many words, that they were looking into one of her employees. They needed a rota or a delivery route and to be allowed to remove property belonging to them from the bakery. Kim's response did make us laugh a little bit because she was like, I don't get paid enough for that, and directed them to HR. HR refused to give anything over without a warrant, which the detectives didn't have enough to get. And so they were stumped. They felt like they hit a wall. With Tim not talking and refusing to provide a DNA sample, they didn't know what else they could do. Sometime later, the whole thing now at the back of Kim's mind. She is in a bar with her husband and some colleagues. And what do you do when you're having a drink with some of your colleagues? You have a little bitch about some of the other colleagues and talk about people. And soon enough, Tim's name came up. Someone offhandedly mentioned that he used to live on Strand Road. And then someone else brought up Mandy. She also lived on Strand Road. She was abducted from Strand Road. And that is when a light bulb went off in Kim's mind. That's why the police came to the bakery. That's what they were looking into. She knew of Mandy's case. She was only 19 when it happened, and she remembered feeling scared that the killer hadn't been caught. Could she now be working with him? After this revelation, she contacted the detective who came back to the bakery to speak to her. She pulled him into her office and outright asked him if he was looking into Tim Bass in connection with Mandy Stavik's murder. And the detective couldn't hide his reaction on his face. Kim said that his eyes popped out of his head like he was a cartoon character. She described Tim Bass to the detective, and it wasn't in a positive light. He was a bit weird, he was different, but he was also a ticking time bomb. You never know what Tim was going to show up to work that day. Despite being his manager, he rarely called Kim by her name. Instead, he would be patronising and condescending and just called her woman. He wore gloves throughout the entirety of his shift when it wasn't necessary. Other members of staff would leave their uniform at the bakery and it would get washed there, but Tim took his home. She provided the detectives with Tim's delivery route and a surveillance team would dispatch to follow him. They wanted to see if he would drop a cigarette butt outside or put some rubbish in a bin somewhere, but Tim wasn't a smoker and he took all of his rubbish home with him. The surveillance was unsuccessful and the detective decided to relay this on to Kim. She wasn't going to accept that that was the end. This was something that needed seeing through. She offered to help the detectives to keep an eye out to see if Tim discarded anything in work that she would be able to collect and then give it to them. But they had to say no. They could not ask a civilian, a member of the public, to collect evidence for them. But if she did happen to find something that she wanted to give to them, she could, but they couldn't ask her to do it. Good job as well, because Kim was the type of woman where she wasn't going to be taken no for an answer. From that day, Kim zoned in on Tim. She watched him with an eagle eye, hoping for something, when it finally happened. 3 months after talking with the detectives again, Tim threw away a plastic cup of water that he had drank out of and a can of Coke in one of the bakery bins. It took 3 months for him to use bins inside of the works building. Kim described her heart beating out of her chest. The bakery was full and she needed 1, Tim to go, and 2, for no one else to see her pulling rubbish out of the bin. And she managed. She put both of them in the drawer of her desk before immediately calling the detective, who couldn't have got to the bakery quicker, to send off the evidence. Weeks would go by and everyone sat on the end of their seats awaiting for a phone call from the lab with the results. It would be 3 months until that phone rang. The woman on the other end of the phone told the detective that the DNA extracted from Mandy Stavik's body and the DNA extracted from the Coke can which Tim Bass had drank from matched. 1 in 11 quadrillion. That is a number that has 15 zeros. It was him. They had found their man. They had found Mandy's killer.
Kaylee Cuoco and Sam Claflin star in the MGM Plus original series, Vanished. When the man Alice loves disappears on a train to the south of France, every romantic memory becomes evidence. Every intimate detail, a potential threat. She thought she knew everything about him, but she may not even know his real name. 4-part thriller Vanished premieres February 1st on MGM+. Finding the truth is a dangerous affair.
Detectives finally had a name backed up by the DNA match. They wanted to speak to Tim Bass again as soon as possible, and so they actually met him outside of work. They started asking him about Mandy again. Did he know her? Did he know what happened to her? Did they ever talk? Did they kiss? Did they have an intimate relationship? All of which Tim denied. Didn't know her, never spoke to her, didn't kiss her, blah blah blah. Now, I think it was former homicide investigator Scott Weinberger who said on his podcast Anatomy of Murder, sometimes a lie is just as good as the truth, because, okay, you've said no to all that, now explain how and why is your DNA there? And that is exactly what these detectives did. Once he was at the station, they conducted a proper interview, and Tim, he's fishing. He doesn't really know why he's there, he doesn't know what they have on them, and then he realises it. He gets the interviewer to admit that they have his DNA, and he's confused because he doesn't remember giving it. Upon the confirmation of them having his DNA, Tim's story starts to change, and it's the complete opposite of the lies that he had just spewed. He said that he was now confessing that yes, he knew Mandy, and they were actually having a top secret love affair. It started off when they met while he was out mountain biking. They started talking, and one thing led to another, and then all of a sudden they were sleeping together. He had his girlfriend, Mandy had Rick, and so the affair was top secret. No one knew about it. Obviously, no one in that room believed a single word of this story. Detectives later discovered that not a single person had ever seen Mandy and Tim interact. Not one single time. If they were having a top secret love affair, you thought that you'd see them talking at least once. But Tim couldn't even answer some personal questions about Mandy, which, if they did know each other and they talked enough that it led to them having an affair, he should know. He didn't know what she was studying at university, what career path she was going down, along with lots of other things. Here is a portion of that interview.
I've been told not to say stuff, and hell with it. I can't do this. I can't. I trust you guys. I can't. If this bites me in the ass, or if this is not what I'm supposed to do, then whatever. I don't give a I slept with her. How long did it go on? I met her. I think I was with my dad. We were mountain bike riding up and down the road, and he talked to her. He had a way with people. He just talked to her, and I talked to her. And then after that, I'd mountain bike up and down the road, and she'd jog. So, and then we'd talk and stuff. So, but I think that was in the spring, so it wasn't that long a relationship because she went away and to college. I want to say Eastern or Central? Central.
Did you have any correspondence with her? Do you have letters, or did you make phone calls to her?
No, she just said when she come back, she'd see me. More of a friendship type thing. We just talked, and then it just kind of grew into more of a physical thing, and we didn't even really do it that much. So it was more kissing and stuff.
At the end of that interview, a now 50-year-old Timothy Forrest Bass was arrested on suspicion of the kidnapping, rape and murder of Mandy Stavik. It was the 12th of December 2017, and the first thing that the detectives wanted to do was to tell Mary. They raced to her home and broke the news. They finally got him. They have made an arrest. They knew who murdered Mandy. This news happened to come on Mary's 81st birthday. Once he was incarcerated, Tim continued to deny the murder, but admitted to Gina about the apparent secret affair. With him now behind bars, she felt safe enough and confident enough to finally go through a divorce with him. The trial began in May 2019, and the prosecutor who worked on the case back in 1989, who by this point was long retired, came out of retirement at 73 to work the trial pro bono. If that's not dedication, I don't know what is. The defense didn't dispute that the DNA belonged to Tim. That was impossible for them to do, 1 in 11 quadrillion. His DNA was recovered from Mandy, but they were arguing that this didn't prove that he murdered her. They got an expert to testify that the semen could have been present for up to 48 hours before the murder. Mandy got home the day before Thanksgiving, and she didn't leave home on Thanksgiving Day, so that meant she would have had to have had sex with Tim either on the day that she arrived or on the day that she was murdered, between going on her run and getting abducted. The prosecution's witness said no, the DNA hadn't been there that long. The defense tried to use the fact that there was no sign of a struggle on Mandy's body, such as no evidence of being bound or restrained, so that showed that the sex was consensual, which, I don't know, if she's been kidnapped by gunpoint and then potentially raped at gunpoint, she's probably too afraid to try and fight back. Many people close to Tim testified against him, and some bombshells were dropped. Gina testified saying that Tim had asked his own mother if they could pin the murder on his deceased father. Here is part of her testimony.
At that point, what happened at the time when you went with your husband and you contacted Sandy Bass?
He asked her, can you say Dad did it?
Okay, and what was he referring to?
The Mandy Stavik murder.
Okay. And what was the response of Sandra Bass? What did she do anything physically? Did she?
Yeah, she put her hands over her face and like this and paused for a minute and then said no.
And as far as the defendant's father, Dad, was he alive at that time?
No.
Had he been deceased for a period of time?
Yes.
I do want to say that during the victim impact statements that came later, Tim's mum denied that that happened, so this is just a case of who you believe, an abused wife or a protective mother. Tom then testified, saying that Tim had asked him to say that he had also had sex with Mandy. He wanted to paint a picture that she was a girl that got about, which the relevance in that I'm struggling to find. Tom, of course, said no, he was not going to lie. He also testified that after the arrest, Tim told him that the police were out to get him and that he needed to come up with an alibi, and he had already thought of the perfect one. His mum had to say that he was out Christmas shopping with her that day and that he was with Tom following that. Which, again, Tom's like, no, I'm not going to lie for you. Despite the best efforts of the defence, the case against Tim Bass was too strong. At the end of the trial, the jury deliberated for a single day before convicting him on all charges. This came 29.5 years to the day of Mandy's murder. 6 weeks later, sentencing took place where people were given the option to read out victim impact statements. Mary's husband read hers on her behalf. He spoke about the devastating loss, how Mary had now lost 2 children to senseless violence, and how they will never recover. This is something that she will never get over. Molly spoke about how distraught the entire ordeal made her, and that Mandy's murder was a, quote, central wound in their lives. Tim was given the opportunity to speak, and this is what he had to say.
I would first like to say that I am 100% innocent of this crime. Furthermore, I don't believe I received a fair trial. In saying that, though, a better man in me says I should say very little today. I give this day to the Stavik family. Sir, I would like to address one thing. I love my father. He was my best friend. We did everything together. He died in an accident on February 17, 2002, and I have not been the same since. I gave his eulogy, I wrote his obituary. In my garage, I made a kind of memorial to him for my ex-wife, under oath, to get on that stand and say, I tried to blame this on him. That is hard to take. I have never been arrested before. I've never been unemployed. I don't do drugs. I don't drink. I've been married for I was married for almost 30 years. I raised 3 great children, 2 of them on the autism spectrum. While this investigation was going on, I actually delivered to this jail twice a week until 2016, when there was route changes. I think that says a lot right there. They're saying that I was in fear, scared. I delivered to this jail. I've tried to be respectful and kind in my year and a half that I've been here. It is very hard to do when you're being accused of something like this. I will continue to be this way. This is just the way I am. I wish no ill will towards anyone here, not even today. But I am having a hard time with this. That's all I have to say.
For the kidnapping, rape and murder of 18-year-old Mandy Stavik, Timothy Forrest Bass was handed a sentence of 27 years to serve. This was the highest that the judge was able to hand down, as he wasn't charged with premeditated murder. It's believed that this was a devastating crime of opportunity, which, if it wasn't for the help of these 3 women, Heather Backstrom, Merilee Anderson and Kim Wagner, it may never have been solved. 3 women who had never met Mandy, who grew up knowing her story, would be the ones to help bring justice. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening so that you never miss a new upload. You can also find photos and updates over on the Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.